Just like a spark that's breaking out. Can't make a stop, can't turn back now. We know that there's no room for doubt. No, we can't turn back now. I see danger in your eyes. They know we'll burn down the night. Coming just like the sunrise. You know that we gonna light it up tonight. We gonna light it up tonight. We gonna light it up tonight. We gonna light it up.
Hey, welcome to the HVAC God live show where we talk about all things HVAC that no one else is willing to talk about. Tonight we do have a special guest, but before we get to Clifton, I want to take a moment to catch you guys up on a couple things. The first thing is numbers have been through the roof, and I expect numbers to probably break records tonight as far as our show goes, just because Clifton is here. He's streaming to his own platforms as well. And if you wouldn't mind, take a moment to like and share our show. I genuinely would appreciate that. For the rest of you, I do want to say I apologize. Last week, I had Clifton and I were all lined up. He was going to be our guest last week, and about 2 hours before the show started, I started feeling a little rough. And by Wednesday night, I was in the hospital. And so last week was a very long, rough week trying to get recovered. And obviously that happened, and here we are. So, and then finally, as always, I just want to take a moment to keep the lights on, pay the bills, and thank the sponsor of tonight's show.
Are you still using this old remote to control your AC? Upgrade to the KMA Smart Controller and unlock a host of smart functions to help you reduce energy consumption by 30% and automate home climate. And the best part, it's compatible with all brands of air conditioners, mini splits, and heat pumps. Now you can control your AC from anywhere in the world, schedule your AC, see your bills in real time, switch off your AC automatically based on occupancy, and even detect open windows. Everything to keep energy consumption as optimized as possible. Upgrade your AC experience today.
Awesome. Good stuff. So I want to take a moment. I do not have a script tonight. Normally I write up a big report of who we're having, but those of you that have watched our show before, you know that this guy needs no introduction. I watched his content for years before he ever knew who I was. And I have probably learned more from this guy and his content than any other individual in the HVAC trade. And now I am just blessed to say that I call him a friend. We can go a month or two without speaking, and then we just pick right up where we left off. And there I am learning again. So I do want to welcome the host of the Did You Know podcast and the ESCO Institute and all the crazy things they're doing. And so just everyone, please welcome Clifton Beck. Let's go. You can tell I have no script tonight, so it's a little rough over here. But anyway,
what an introduction, man! I appreciate you so much. I'm so glad that we've got to know each other because it's a great friendship, and I absolutely appreciate it. I'm glad you're feeling better too. I mean, it's
last week was a crazy journey, but yeah. Where to begin, sir? Where do we begin?
So there are so many people, not just technicians, but business owners and especially homeowners out there that are wondering, like, why are we going through these transitions? And why did we end up with 2 refrigerants in residential, right? That's the biggest question. And so I'm not going to spend any time diving into the whys of why we're doing the refrigerant transition, because that's a whole separate conversation, which we kind of dove into before. This one, we want to focus on, like, why did we end up with 2? Like, if we think back, hey, Gary, what's going on? Like, if we think back about, like, let's go back to R22, right? And let's do a transition. And for those of you out there that are fellow HVAC nerds like the 2 of us, you might find this interesting. Okay, are you ready? All right, here we go. All right, little history lessons here. Hold on a second. All right, so we started. Let's say we had R22, right? Yeah, R22. And for anyone that isn't familiar, like, so this is our periodic table of elements that I built for us for refrigerants, all available through ESCO if you have any interest in them. So anyhow, here's what we're doing, right? So when we had R22, I could actually take this as far back as R12. Like, the only difference between molecularly, the only difference between R12 and R22 was that R12 had 2 chlorine, right? To get from R12 to R22, we took out 1 chlorine and we replaced it with hydrogen. Well, the hydrogen is where it started as a methane molecule. Anyhow, R12 to R22, pull out 1 atom of chlorine, replace it with the hydrogen, boom, you got R22, right? Still had some chlorine in it. So we moved from R22 into R32. That was the actual progression, R22 to R32. So remember, R12, take out, so you had 2 chlorine, take out 1 chlorine, put in hydrogen, boom, you got R22. If you take out the other chlorine in 22 and it's hydrogen, so that you have 2 fluorine, 2 hydrogen, that's R32, right? 22. 32. We actually went to R32 like around 1996. So chemically, we were going to go to R32 because it was a lower global warming potential. It had no ozone depleting potential because we got rid of that other chlorine. We had R32, and the industry is like, we got something, right? But then it was mildly flammable. So we weren't ready to go with mildly flammable. So we took it, right? Let's take there she is. Let's take R32, right? So there's the 2 hydrogen. There's our 2 fluorine. R32, and it's a little bit flammable. So let's mix it with R125. It has a bunch of fluorines. These should be blue, but I didn't have enough blue, so I used purple, right? Right? Bunch of fluorines, flame suppressant, R125. Boom, mix those 2 together, and you get R410A. So R32 was the base of R410A from the beginning, but to get rid of that little bitty bit of flammability, we added the R125. Right. So our actual natural progression was 12, 22, 32. And because that flammability, we're like, let's go ahead and let's tame 32 down, get back into an A1. And then that's what we'll do. And then as we moved forward, we finally got comfortable with the thought of going to mildly flammable. Because remember, when we went from 22 to 410A, our global warming potential actually went up a bunch. Right. And so we wanted to get rid of the global warming potential. So we're like, all right, let's ditch the 125. Let's get back to R32. And we got R32, and it's a pretty good refrigerant. It's a really good refrigerant. It runs a little different than R410A though, right? It's got some discharge temperature that is a little higher than R410A. There's some differences, but we can go to R32. Here's the thing. A lot of countries around the world, when we went to R410A, they went to R32. A lot of people don't understand that. Like early 2000s, there was a lot of R32 being in units around the world, right?
Wow,
so,
was that?
It was a good refrigerant. And a lot of places around the world, they were able to, if they even had building codes, they were able to update their building codes fast enough to allow R32, this mildly flammable refrigerant, to be used in residential and like commercial installations. Here in the United States, it's crazy. Like you would think that the United States is like the modern world and we have like the most update codes. We are like some of the worst. Like some of our building codes are 15, even 20 years behind in different places around the country. And the whole country doesn't run on the same codes. So it just took forever for us to get to that point. But here's what happened. And this is the reason we went with 2 refrigerants. When the equipment manufacturers started looking at what the replacements were for R410A, they knew that 32 was a great solution, but the design operating characteristics are different, right? The compressor mapping is different on 32 than it is 410, enough that they had to do a lot of redesigning of the equipment. Now, you had companies, particularly Daikin, right, who had already been using 32 and equipment around the world. They already had their equipment designed for 32. So they were going to have to do some equipment modifications to be able to go from 410 to 32. They're not drop in. They're very different. The compressors are typically different. The coils are different sizing. So there was, not including the mitigation stuff for the flammability, just the operating pressures. So they knew that, okay, we can go to 32, but we're going to have to redesign our equipment a little bit. A lot of times it's going to be a change of a compressor in a model, but we can do it. But it's going to take some retooling and re-engineering. And so they decided they wanted to do that because they already had all the designs done. They didn't have to invest in engineering. It was already done in other places around the world. They just had to update their models with the correct compressors and correct coils, equipment revisions. So in August, no later than August of 2024, Daikin, well, you've been down to the Waller facility. You represent Daikin all the time, right?
Yep.
Daikin started converting their entire factory here in the United States, one product line at a time. They started taking an R410A line down, and then they would retool it to be able to start manufacturing R32 products. And so they were able to, over a 6 to 8 month window, go through every one of their lines and start updating the product designs so that they would be ready to operate on R32. So that, because remember, every manufacturer had to be switched over by January 1st of 25, right? That was, they had to be able to switch over all the residential light commercial product lines. So that's what Daikin did. And they said, hey, we've been using R32. We actually have a bunch of patents on it. We're going to open them up to the industry. Anyone who wants to use R32, here you go. But you're going to have to redesign your equipment to do that, right? And so all of the other manufacturers had to look at the refrigerants and go, okay, do we want to redesign every single model of equipment out there? Or is there any way that we can have any potential solutions to this, right? So chemists, particularly at Chemours and Honeywell, had pulled out a chemical, and it's not new, right? This is actually used in a lot of applications. This is R1234YF. It is a hydrofluorocarbon. It's an HFC chemical that has this unique olefin bond. Instead of having a single connection between the carbon atoms, it's got this synthetic double bond, right? It's not new. The actual chemical itself was patented in 1960 by DuPont. It could have been used as a refrigerant, but it itself was slightly flammable, right? No one was ever ready for that. So what the chemists were able to do was they were able to design a refrigerant that had an R32 base blended with R1234YF. And its operating characteristics almost matched R410A. The compressor mapping looked the same. The heated compression was very similar. The compressor discharge temperatures actually decreased. And so by using a combination of 32 and R1234YF to create this other refrigerant that we now recognize as R454B, they were able to create a refrigerant that could be used in manufacturing without having to remake every one of your models. You had to add the mitigation requirements to it, the A2L mitigation. But as far as design and construction, very, very limited, very minimal changes in product designs. So many manufacturers looked at it from a different perspective, and they thought, well, you know what? It's going to be an interesting switch no matter what we do. But maybe so that we can keep the supply of R410A equipment up to be ready for the summer of 25, we'll go ahead, we'll use we'll go with the R454B route, and we'll run manufacturing all the way up until like December 30th. And then we'll shut down for a day. We'll change all the refrigerant lines so that we're now going to be using R454B. We're going to change all of our labels and our decals. There are some pieces of equipment that's going to need some minor modifications, but overall, it's not like this 6-month process of converting over a factory. We could actually do it very, very quickly. But what that did is, because it wasn't like even, like it wasn't like 50% of the industry went with 32 and 50% went with 454B. Daikin, Goodman, Amana, and Daikin, they went with 32. Some manufacturers are using 32 in part of their products, but their larger production lines are all R454B. So they were able to run right till the very end of the year, change over, launch their products January 1st. That was the cool thing about R454B. It had some advantages. You could switch every single one of your product lines over, boom, like that. And January 1st, you're shipping R454B units right out the door. Everyone met the requirements that were set forth by the AIM Act and the Technology Transition Rule through the EPA. Everything was fine and dandy, except for a majority of manufacturers went with R454B, which meant there was like this slam of R454B equipment starting January 1st, right? And so there was this massive load on the supply of R454B refrigerants. Remember, like 32 is already out there being used in equipment. And because they were like Goodman, Amana, Daikin were able to shut their lines down over a period of time, it allowed a transition. I mean, there were people out there going, yeah, I'm getting R32 Daikin fits right now in October of 24, right?
Right.
That's why that happened, right? So you had a few manufacturers switch over to 32 over a 6 to 8 month window, and you had a whole bunch of manufacturers switching over to R454B overnight, and boom, there went the demand for R454B. Isn't that crazy?
It's an interesting summary of events. I think that some of us may see it differently, although I think what you're saying is 100% spot on. I still think there are many of us that see the glass half empty on all of this, and want to hold someone accountable for some of the problems we've seen.
Yeah.
That have been well documented. But I do wonder, though, do you think that the shortage that we've seen, I mean, I think they probably will eventually get it figured out, but do you think that anyone has looked for other solutions because of this?
Yeah, there's been a bunch of, solutions that people have came up with. And so I've been on a bunch of panels, a bunch of industry associations that have, had this discussion and talked about the ways that it's being managed by the different aspects of the supply chain, whether it's the refrigerant, whether it is the cylinders the refrigerant goes into, looking at like how we do this. And so, there's a lot of things that are happening that are very legal, and there's even things that are happening that are illegal, right? So you and I have this conversation all the time. It's a very interesting time in the history, especially residential. Now, but you look at like commercial industrial, like I spent most of my time in commercial refrigeration. This was the norm, right? When multiple refrigerants was the norm for everything that we worked on. So now that it's happening in residential, everyone's freaking out, but it's nothing new, right? And so we've seen good practices happen, and we've seen bad practices happen. And I think it's important that homeowners understand that, that there's a very significant shortage in the supply of R454B refrigerant, right? Very significant. A lot of forecasting from the industry wasn't done properly. They'll admit it. The manufacturers will admit that forecasting for the demand exceeded expectation. The demand for equipment exceeded expectation. You got to think too, a lot of manufacturers were hoping that R410A stock would ride them out through the end of the year, right? Because one thing happened in the middle of that a lot of people didn't see, right? The whole transition away from R410A, originally, the last install date was supposed to be January 1st of 2025. Right. And so the manufacturers were like, man, we got to get this done. Like we got to get it done. and then hopefully we'll have enough equipment to get us through summer. Well, then came along the update to the technology transition rule, and they were like, yeah, let's extend that through January of 26 to give a little bit more time to get rid of that R410A stock. And then the manufacturer's like, cool, that should get us through the summer. It didn't. It didn't even get us into spring. We ran out of R410A equipment in the spring, which meant that immediately we had to start buying R454B equipment. And so there's like this massive rush of 454B. There's so many contributors to it. I mean, and because like I've even mentioned before that there's been hoarding of R454B, and people are like, that don't happen. There's not enough out there. I'm like, let me send you the post. You can get a hold of the person that's sitting in front of it like it's a toilet paper, bundle.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of reasons that R454B is in shortage, and there've been bad practices. And I encourage homeowners that are purchasing systems, particularly R454B systems, have that conversation with your contractor. Like, do you have service gas for this piece of equipment? Or are you going to try to use a wrong type of refrigerant in this thing to get it by? Because that's a very important conversation.
Well, I'm actually glad you brought that up, because I did do a video recently where I talked about some of the things we are hearing, some of the technicians in our trade admit to doing. Some of those, as you mentioned, are certainly frowned upon, if not 100% illegal to do, such as, say, adding 410A to a 454B system. So my question would be that I would want to know, if I was a homeowner, what if my contractor needed to get my AC running, so he did put 410A in my 454B system? Is that going to be okay?
So the very first thing that you do is you now create a new chemical that is an unregistered refrigerant. So remember, there's this thing called the SNAP ruling, the Significant New Alternatives Policy for Refrigerants by the EPA. And it is what dictates what refrigerants can be used in what pieces of equipment, right? So a refrigerant manufacturer has to submit that refrigerant to the EPA to be tested and approved to be able to be used in a piece of equipment. And the only two refrigerants approved in new installations are the R-32 and R-32 systems, and R454B and R454B systems. If you were to add any other refrigerant to either one of those systems, you just introduced a refrigerant into the system that does not have a PT chart. And if it has an electronic expansion valve, it's going to flip out because it doesn't know exactly where it's supposed to tune to. And second of all, you've now created a new refrigerant in this system. You've violated an EPA regulation, and you've potentially voided a warranty through a manufacturer. That's a lot of work.
Well, and I think the argument that's being had, and I've seen it on social media, is there are many pros, if you want to call them that are arguing, well, I've done it. It's working. It's blowing cold in their house. But what's concerning to me is, what about 4 years later? What about 8 years later when Mrs. Jones's system goes out? And number one, hopefully that they wrote on there that they put that refrigerant in there, because the next guy's gonna have to figure out how to deal with that. But number two, I mean, at bare minimum, we both know that 410A has operating pressures at least slightly higher than 454B. So
for anyone looking for that, I threw us a PT chart together too.
Okay. Of course you did.
So that we can compare R22, R32. We can compare the dew and bubble of R410A, because R410A was a blended refrigerant with a glide, and the dew and bubble of 454B. So they're actually very similar, right? We're a few degrees different. And so it's not significant difference, but the thing that I worry about the most is oil return, right? Our refrigerants are designed, and the compressors are engineered to work with the refrigerant for a very specific capability of oil return, right? And I really worry about, when you create a new refrigerant, how are you going to affect the oil return to the compressor, right? And it's not a study that's been done because nobody wants it to be done, right? No manufacturer wants this to happen. And so there are no studies on that. And that is a big concern, is that if we affect the operating pressure and the operating characteristics of the refrigerant inside of the system, we have the potential to affect the oil return, the oil migration. That was a big thing in commercial refrigeration. That was the reason we had so many alternative refrigerants when we were moving away from R12, because in some pieces of equipment, a 422B or a 414B would be feasible. But in other pieces of equipment that had different design characteristics, we'd have to use something like a 409 or something else that had a different oil return characteristic. And so that is one of the biggest concerns when we start blending refrigerants, is how is it going to affect the actual return of oil? If it is a system that has an electronic expansion valve that's utilizing pressure transducers and temperature thermistors to calculate the balance midpoint and the percentages that should be functioning, stepping up and down, now it has no idea where to go, because R410A has a very small glide and R454B actually has a pretty significant glide to it. R32 has none because it is a single component refrigerant. So anytime we blend any of these refrigerants, now our separation changes. Our calculations for that true center point for an electronic expansion valve has no reference, because the temperatures and pressures aren't calculated properly. So
can I just throw in? Well, go ahead and finish that thought. Sorry,
No,
I do have one concern.
Now we look at like a thermostatic expansion valve. That's operating on temperature, right? That is the most reliable with refrigerants. Now, when we get into the electronic expansion valves, that's where things get a little hairy. So at least for myself, that is my biggest concern, is electronic expansion valves, oil return with a mixed refrigerant.
Well, so because I keep hearing people say what you just said, and again, I'm ignorant. You're way smarter than I am. But the thing that I keep looking at, let me see if I can pull it up here, Clifton. So I've got a PT chart here, pretty basic one. We got our temperature on the left here and a bunch of refrigerants, and the second one over is going to be 410, and then the fourth one over is going to be 454B. And so if we come down to some of the head pressures that we're used to seeing, so here we are at 108 psi and a 350 108 degrees at 350 psi head pressure here with 410. We're seeing a significantly lower head pressure with 454B there. So that's what I was saying, is if you add 410A to a 454B system, then you should see at most at bare minimum, somewhat of a higher pressure on that compressor than it was designed for. Do you see where I'm going with that?
100%, which throws off your subcooling calculation, throws off your superheat calculation. So it throws off a lot more than people think. Does it cool? Well, there's a lot of things you can do in life that are wrong that are still functional.
Sure.
I can, we're being technicians. We can tell you all about that, right? But I worry about that, especially when we get into like the safety side of things, right? Because now we're talking about a system that we don't know what those pressures are even supposed to be and what the running characteristics. There's some of the worst examples of using incorrect refrigerants actually come from the agricultural side. There are R12 combines and tractors in the field that people remove the R12 and will use straight R290. Refrigerant operating pressures are very, very similar, and it cools even better than R12. But now we've introduced a highly flammable gas into a system that uses an open drive compressor. The compressor on our engines are an open shaft. They have a seal that leaks on them pretty regularly. So it's easy to assume something would work, to attempt it, and to be able to say that it does, and then take ownership of it.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening.
Well, and that's why I brought it up, because that's the argument that I keep seeing these guys make. Well, it's blowing cold. Yeah, but what about 8 years from now? What about poor Mrs. Jones, she just spent all that money with you and you did that to her, and now, 8 years later, you're long gone. You could care less. And I don't know. It's just not a good look.
It's not. And that's really the scenario that we're encountering, is that as an industry, we're trying to accept bad practices. It's no different than not pulling a vacuum on a system. You can fire up a system by purging refrigerant through it and trying to push the air out and firing it up. They used to do it back before we had 608 regulations. Was it the right thing to do? Never. We have taught proper evacuation. Ty Branneman's perfect example. He's got an early installation manual that teaches proper evacuation from like 1944 or 46 or something, right? Back when our vacuum pumps were open drive vacuum systems that were still, back then we were teaching you that the correct way was to evacuate a system properly before you allow the refrigerant into the system. So unfortunately, it's another one of those practices, like I said, that we are trying to accept bad practices as a standard. And I worry about it. It just sends us down another rabbit hole of doing the wrong things.
So how do we right the ship here? I mean, we've got all these folks going in different directions now. And one could argue that the market will right the ship, and the right companies will do well. And I think we're seeing that, that some companies are doing better than others with this whole transition. But how do we get back to some semblance of normalcy with all of this, especially for technicians that, by gosh, I was happy when R-22 was kind of starting to go away, although I loved R-22, but I hated carrying R-22 and 410A on my truck. Now I've got 410A on my truck and these two new refrigerants, and when's it going to end here?
Yeah, no time soon. Because think about this. I will use the HFC phase down in one reference for this conversation. They'll both be gone, including R410A. All three of them will be gone in 11 years. So that's the reality.
I guess the ship will be righted then. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So as far as the industry is right now, we're going to probably have another 6 months of transition, just being honest. Now, the contractors that are working with their local distributors and they're making partnerships with their local distributors, I can tell you how simple this conversation is, right? This is how simple the conversation is. I am doing my due diligence to reclaim as much refrigerant as I possibly can, and I want to bring it to you for reclamation, and I would like to have access to new refrigerants. Because remember, we are in this boat because of us. We are in this HFC phase down and this reduction of HFC manufacturing of refrigerants because we didn't fix leaks and we didn't reclaim refrigerants to begin with. Do you know what the reclamation percentage is of every year annually?
Less than 20?
It's less than.
Really?
95% of the refrigerants that we purchase never come back. That's the whole reason we're doing the phase down, is because of the impact of HFC refrigerants into whether you can look at it as global warming, you can look at it however you want to. I can tell you that refrigerants release a whole lot more CO2 than CO2 does, thousands of times more, right? So it's not good no matter what. So if we would have been repairing leaks and reclaiming refrigerant the way that we were supposed to, there would never been a shortage to begin with. There would never been this whole reduction that we're seeing, because we would have enough supply gas coming back that we'd never had a shortage, right? It's not a shortage of R1234YF. 90% of all vehicles manufactured in the world are using R1234YF. It's not a shortage of R32, except for the fact that if there was more 32, if we would be reclaiming and bringing all that 410A back, we'd just simply separate the 32 out of it, and we would be able to reuse that, because that whole phase down doesn't affect reclaimed gas. It only affects newly manufactured. That's the thing. The manufacturers, it's not like the manufacturers can just like keep on pumping out refrigerant. They're all limited. They're all capped. because of the HFC phase down. It's like Jason Abjud explains it so simple. It's a piggy bank, right? It's a piggy bank. Instead of pennies, it's got GWPs in it. And right now, our refrigerant manufacturers can only manufacture 60% of the piggy bank that they were able to do 5 years ago. 60%. The increase of equipment's going up, and the ability to make refrigerants is going down. And so they can only, once the piggy bank's empty, there's nothing they can do. And that's the reason there's a significant shortage, because of that demand. January 1st, 25, people get their piggy bank back again, or 26, piggy bank comes back, boom, we'll start dumping refrigerant very, very comfortably. The only way we can make this easier is if we can reclaim refrigerant, get it back to the reclamation facilities, let them separate that R32 out, and now we've got more service gas. I'm telling you, if we don't tenfold change the way that we reclaim refrigerants, we'll never make it to 2036. We're going to be out of surface gases. We might have new equipment that has gas, but we won't have surface gas. It's crazy.
Well, I mean, I hate to be the pessimist in the room, but I don't see it changing. I don't see guys making a large, change in their daily habits to try to do things differently. At least that's what I'm seeing. I mean,
think about how many gas and goes, right? We always joke about gas and goes. How many customers we have that are gas and goers. Every year we come back and put refrigerant in them. Every pound we put in that system was a pound that won't be able to go back in another. And what's really going to hurt, all right, in this phase down, January 1st of 2029. I know it seems like a long time away, but it's 3.5 years. We're adding an additional major step on that, and we're going to go from 40% on down the slope, right? And so by January 29, if we don't get better, our industry is going to have to transition faster than the phase down. And I don't want it to be that. I want to be positive with this whole change. I look at our homeowners, for the homeowners that are listening right now, I want us to have refrigerant to fix your system when it has problems. If I don't reclaim gas from broken systems and leaky systems, I won't be able to do that in the future. Either refrigerant, 32, 454B, or 410A.
Why don't we use R718 more? You know which refrigerant I'm talking about when I say
water? H2O. And so, all right. We're going to see the day. Like, there's already a chiller, right? So the chiller is in Sweden, and it's using the magnetic bearing compressors, and it's running on H2O. Right? So we're going to see things like H2O, CO2, R290. We're going to see all these lower GWP natural refrigerants in a really short period of time. Like, they're already out here and people don't even realize it. If anyone's ever installed a Sanco CO2 unit, CO2 heat pump water heater, that's CO2, right? So we're going to end up seeing a lot of changes in our industry in the next decade. And I don't want to scare people. I want to prepare people. And having our service gas is one of the most important things that we can focus on as technicians. Because whenever we start transitioning over to these other refrigerants, we need to make sure that we got enough service gas to be able to take care of the R22, the R410A, the R32, and the R454B systems that we're installing right now.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, as a serious question, I mean, I feel like what little bit I do know about water as a refrigerant,
it's the
boiling point seems fine to me.
The great refrigerant.
I mean, why don't we use it? Why haven't we used it? Is it because of are the heat and air guys that are conspiracy theorists correct when they say there wasn't enough money in it for the chemical manufacturers to I mean,
no,
why aren't we using it?
As soon as we get to the point where we can utilize magnetic bearing compressors or refrigerant vapor compressor suspension, we'll be able to. Right now, the cost of the manufacturing is astronomical, right? So we use them in chillers. Like, we have tons of magnetic bearing chillers out there. The cool thing about using a magnetic bearing compressor is we can use whatever refrigerant we want. It doesn't matter what oil is in the system, right? So as soon as we can get to that point and be able to manufacture a compressor that will work in residential like commercial applications, we don't need oil anymore. And then we can use whatever refrigerant we want.
Including water.
I look forward to that day. Yeah. So this chiller that's in Sweden is fully functioning on water as a refrigerant, commercial chiller. So the technology is out there, right? Maybe one day that's going to be the norm. I don't know. But we're going to have to go somewhere. Otherwise,
it certainly sounds safer than some of these alternatives.
Oh yeah. R290 propane, highly flammable, can't be in a building. It's got to be an air to water monoblock sitting outside. CO2, same scenario. Can't be refrigerant inside. It's got to be a monoblock unit sitting outside, right? So both of those air to water solutions, high pressures on a CO2 system, over 2000 PSI head pressure, right? We're not soft soldering anything. We're barely brazing. Sometimes we're welding, so those transitions is what we'll end up seeing in our industry. And that's why I keep ringing this bell of like the importance of understanding this refrigerant transition. It's not like the manufacturers are going to just keep on pumping out refrigerant because we demand it. They can't. Their hands are tied. They're only going to be able to manufacture as much refrigerant as allowed for them to manufacture. And we're already 40% down, right? We're already down the slide. So it's going to continue to get worse. So the supply is going away. The demand's still high, which means we have to get better at managing the refrigerant that we use. We have to multiply how well we recover refrigerants, getting back to reclamations. I'm tomorrow heading over to Hudson to go through, reclamation and how important that is for our industry and show what that process of reclaiming refrigerant looks like. Like I can remember when I used to take a recovery cylinder of refrigerant and I took it to my local distributor, it would cost me $25 to take that in. And if they did a quick refrigerant test and it showed that it was a blended mixed refrigerant, they charged me $75 for that cylinder because it cost for reclamation. Now those reclaimed gases are starting to have value to them, like pretty decent value. So the tides have turned where we can now look at the refrigerant that's in a system and go, that's got value, not just monetary value, but that gives me access to refrigerants in the future. I've talked to distributors that have struck deals with some of these larger contractors saying, if you're committing to bringing us reclamation gas, we will commit to selling you gas because it just makes their supply more available. So we're going to start seeing rationing of refrigerants, period. All refrigerants in the HFC class, period. Not just us, but in the commercial sector. Like you go to New York right now, you go to try to work on a walk-in freezer with R404 in it, it's bad. It's rationed really, really, really bad. Like we moan and groan. It's nothing like the commercial refrigeration with 404 because 404 has twice the GWP that R410 was. So other sectors are already starting to see refrigerant rationing because of those GWPs and the lack of reclaimed gas coming back. If we reclaimed all of the gas that went out, we would have service gas forever. We wouldn't even have to manufacture new. We just reuse what's out in the industry.
So do you think there is any, I kind of already know the answer, but I'm going to ask anyway. Do you think there is any chance under the sun that something could be invented in the future that we just don't know about now that will become the next thing?
I was very hopeful with HFO refrigerants when I first seen them. I'm like, sweet. Because think about this, right? It's a piggy bank. I could take R410A is what? 2088, something like that. 20-some hundred GWP, right? I can make 1 pound of a refrigerant that has 2100 GWP, as an example, or I can make 2,100 pounds of refrigerant that has a GWP of 1. Remember, the piggy bank is about GWPs. I can make 1 pound of a high GWP or a whole crap load of low GWP. And so when I first started seeing things like this HFO that's got a GWP that's, single digits, I went, sweet, maybe that's our solution. And then I started, diving deeper into it and realized that, well, it's not new. It's actually been around a long time. And I don't know that we have enough science on it yet to be able to say that this is the solution. Because to me, now this is me personal, right? That every refrigerant we've ever manufactured, every class of refrigerants was based on what elements were in it, right? If we had hydrogen and fluorine and carbon, that was an HFC, right? If I had hydrogen, fluorine, and chlorine and carbon, hydrochlorofluorocarbon. And then I get an HFO and I go, what the heck's an O? There's no oxygen in there, right? O on the periodic table, that's oxygen. If this was truly an HFO, this would be a hydrogen, fluorine, oxygen. It's not. It's a hydrogen, fluorine, carbon. It's an HFC refrigerant with a unique bond that's not been in the industry. 2012 was the first one that we seen. Cadillac started using them in 2012, using R154YF. There's a lot of concern about all fluorinated gases. Like, that's where the whole F-gas thing comes from, is from fluorine. You didn't know, if everybody out there watching, when you see F-gas regulations, that's fluorine gases. That's all of these. They're all fluorinated gases, right? So none of them are safe in my book. Even if they have a low GWP, what happens when they break down in the atmosphere, right? They have a low GWP because of that olefin bond. That olefin bond breaks up easy once it starts getting into the atmosphere. That's why it has that low global warming potential. Gets up in the atmosphere, boom, olefin bond, boom. Now we come back down. But what are we left with? Oh, hydrocarbon. That ought to be flammable. And fluorocarbon, that's a highly fluorinated gas. What is that? We don't know what the long-term consequences are. We do this as an industry. I hate it that we just keep going from bad refrigerant to bad refrigerant to bad refrigerant to bad refrigerant, and
Same.
Not jumping into, like, why didn't we go to art? Like, why didn't we just stop? Why wouldn't we just go like, all right, we don't need refrigerants in the house. Period. Flammable, non-flammable, toxic, we don't care. We don't need them. They don't have to be in the house. Put a little chiller outside. A little heat pump chiller that can heat water or cool water. And bring me some water inside. And I can use whatever refrigerant I want outside. Because we're already using R290. Like our propane, like most of your reach-in coolers and reach-in freezers, they're all propane now. All of our domestic refrigerators, it's all isobutane.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I feel like that's the argument that's being made now.
Mhm.
that they're saying, like my old boss used to say, you got to hold a girl's hand before you kiss her on the mouth, right? So in America, we're having our hand held, and they're not going to kiss us directly on the mouth.
Mhm.
They're going to take us one step at a time, and now we're moving to slightly flammable refrigerants, only to eventually move to technologies like you're describing. But if I'm being completely honest with you, I am on the side of, I don't want flammable refrigerants either, and I don't care if it is outside the home.
Mhm.
Maybe I've seen too many TikTok videos of barefooted guys getting blown up,
Mhm.
but I don't care if it's outside the house. I don't care how many R290 refrigeration systems are out there. I don't want to be on the news. I don't want something blowing up in my hands. And I don't, you see where I'm going with that? And it's like, I certainly don't want to work on it. It better be plug and play. Better be able to cut those water lines loose, swap the system, and plug it back up and move on, because I don't want something blowing up in my hands.
Right. I found myself in the same predicament. And until I realized that I've already got 20 pounds of R290 sitting 3 feet from my house now. And I got 30 pounds sitting underneath of my seat in the vehicle. Both A3 gases. So it's a level of comfort for sure. And we're going to see that transition. Like, I don't want to. You're right. A2Ls are a baby step. They're a baby step. that we should have taken in the 90s. And we should have not been in A2Ls now. We should have been into things other than A2Ls now. That's a cold, hard truth. And so we are transitioning into other refrigerants. And every technician in the field right now, and every homeowner out there, in the next decade, you're going to see this transition.
Yeah.
It's that simple. We have to completely rethink our system designs. We have to not think about copper tubing that has refrigerant running through it, through our house. We have to rethink it and go, well, maybe we should just use PEX and water. But it gives us a lot of options. I'm actually going to be doing an installation on one here in in the next few months, it sounds like, to be able to show the benefits of using a technology like that. And it'll be using an A2L refrigerant. But to be able to show that, does it matter? Howard Weiss, our president, he said, we were talking about refrigerants, this whole transition, and we started getting a lot of heat, man, because we've been doing A2L training for 3 years,
Right.
almost 4, right? So we were trying to get the industry prepared, and we were on a conversation about this, all right? Little conversation, Jason and Howard and I think Eugene might even be there on that one, and we were talking about refrigerants, and Howard said, ESCO's job is to make everyone comfortable with whatever refrigerant is next, because there's always going to be a next. And it doesn't matter if milk is the next refrigerant, we're going to teach you how to work with it. And that's the truth. We want everyone to get very comfortable with A2Ls. Very, very, very comfortable, very quick, because it's got a 10-year shelf life.
Yeah. One thing we did not talk about, and I'm curious to hear. Yeah, actually, you might have danced around it there, but I don't know if we actually used this term, and that is the term of PFAs.
Oh,
And we talked a lot about GWP, but we didn't talk about how R-32, as far as I know, is the only option right now that does not have PFAs in it. 454B does, 410A does, and it's something I don't think that is talked about enough, because the EPA just last year released that it's no longer going to be allowed to be in our drinking water. I've been on this ball of mud for 4 decades, and they just now came out and said they don't want it in our drinking water. But, I think the writing could be on the wall with that as well, with them coming out and saying, well, we don't want it in our air either.
Yeah. It's the giant in our industry. Right? Remember, we started out with ODP, ozone depleting potential. Any technician who went through EPA 608 training, that's what you learn. We went through ozone depleting potential because of the hole in the ozone. 1980s, we started focusing on the removing of chlorine from our refrigerants to reduce the effect of ozone depletion because of the chlorine, the way it breaks down in the atmosphere, right? That was us, big contributor. We moved from it to global warming potential, so that we were looking at these things a little bit differently, going, okay, well, we get rid of the chlorine, and hydrogen's not bad, but the dirty F word of our industry. It's fluorine. And the way fluorine breaks down. Now, think about this though, right? So the reason some of these, let's do R12, right? Let's do, or no, that's, yeah. R12, right? Okay. R12, high ozone depleting potential, lots of chlorine, high global warming potential. Why is it a high global warming potential? Why is any F gas anything with high global warming potential? Well, it's because the fluorine stays up in the atmosphere for a long period of time, creating a blanket, right? All UV radiation comes through, hits the fluorinated gases, gets trapped in the atmosphere. All right, well, that's fine and dandy. We get rid of some of these and we'll reduce that. But what happens when things do break apart and our dirty little F words make it back to the ground? That's the whole concept of PFAS. It's polyfluoros, right? It's a construction of fluorine atoms in a molecule that affects groundwater. And so you're going to start seeing PFAS and F-gas regulations, and understand that both of those are related to fluorinated gases and the way that they are breaking down and decomposing as they make their way back to the ground. And it does bring up some of the concern with refrigerants that have a lot of fluorine that break apart easy in the atmosphere. If they have a low global warming potential, that simply means they got up there and poof, they came back down. Well, what happens when they get back down? Right? So these are great refrigerants in my mind. These are great refrigerants in a system. But are they great refrigerants when they get in the atmosphere? And knowing that we lose 95% of the refrigerant that's being manufactured, that means it's going in the atmosphere or it's going to the ground. That's the two. So long term, any refrigerant with fluorine, it has the potential for creating this. I don't know if you've seen the thing that was in like New Mexico, the lake that had like 10,000 times the acceptable limit of PFAS in the groundwater. It's nuts, right? Like we've already got countries around the world that are trying to ban all fluorinated gases because they're starting to see an increase in the level of, there's a couple of things. There's TFA and there's TFAS, trifluoroacetic acid, right? There's these different chemical decompositions, things that happen when chemicals break down that we're starting to see in groundwater. And I worry about that myself, right? If my groundwater is getting contaminated and I know that 95% of the refrigerant that's being worked on in my industry is going to the atmosphere because people don't fix leaks and they don't recover refrigerant, I worry about that. I want to take all the refrigerants away from my whole industry, but we can't do that, right? I want to have air conditioning refrigerators too. So we gotta be smart is what we got to do. We got to be educated. We got to be on shows like this. As homeowners, as technicians, as contractors, you've got to be on shows like this, where Josh brings things to you with firsthand information, with great conversational pieces, with love, right? You're right. You're on it, man. That's why you and I have become so close so fast, is because you wear your heart on every inch of your skin. And I believe in that, right? I mean, there's probably going to be people out here who's going to give me some emails tomorrow going, hey, what was that thing you said about HFOs? I think you're pushing the boundaries there. Well, I think we should. And I think as a homeowner, if we've got a leaking system, we ourselves have the responsibility to get that sucker fixed and not just throw gas in it every year.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, we're going to be wrapping up shortly, folks. If we one thing we like to do on our show is, we all know there's bad apples in the heating and air industry. And if you know any good apples, if you know a good heating and air company, a good plumber or electrician, do me a favor, drop their name in the chat and I will pop them up at the bottom down here, over here. And we'll definitely send those companies some love. Just drop their name and where they're located in the country. What's the unknown here, Clifton? What are we not talking about? And the reason I asked you this question, let me preface it by saying this. When they first started rolling out these A2L refrigerants, I think it was you. I think we were chatting one night and I'm like, what? You know, no one's talking about that, you know? And what I'm talking about is, they told us 410A is going away. They rolled out these new A2L refrigerants, but what they didn't tell us, and I still don't think it's being advertised, is they're going away too. You know, I don't think that that's talked about enough. So I say all that to say, what are we not talking about right now? What is the right hand doing so that we don't see what the left hand is actually doing over there? Anything?
Man. I think it's the whole rethinking our mindset about refrigerants, like rethinking these things that we've been doing the same now. For our first residential split system came out in like 50, 52, somewhere in that ballpark. So 50 some years we've been doing the same thing over and over and over. And it's time that we rethink, and it's time that we start asking the questions. Why are we doing these same things over and over? Why are we going through refrigerant changes that aren't really making a significant difference? And are there solutions? and let's talk about those solutions. I think as an industry, we have to stop complaining and start asking.
Yeah. I like it. I like it. Well, cool. Well, those of you that are still with us, I do want to say thank you to those of you that are subscribers. It obviously helps us out. If you're not subscribed, we would certainly appreciate it. We are trying to, keep you updated on the latest information and all that good stuff. So if you're kind enough to leave a subscribe, I will be back next Tuesday night, as always, at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific. And Clifton, if you wouldn't mind, just kind of let folks know where they can find you in case they want to.
Sure.
All of this.
Yeah, LinkedIn, anywhere, Clifton Beck. You can find us at escogroup.org, and you'll find anything that I'm doing right there on the page somewhere.
I like it. Good enough. Well, you guys have a great week. Appreciate you all, and I'll see you then. Have a great week. Take care.
Thank you.